Hi all, hope you've been staying safe and well. What I'd like to do on this short video today is just to run through Act 2 and just have a quick recap about what the most important points of action and most important significant scenes are in Act 2, just in preparation for moving on towards Act 3. So this is just going to run through things nice and quickly. There may be a few quotations in here, but essentially this is just a plot summary looking at the entirety of Act 2. So I hope it's really, really useful for you. Okay, so let's begin with Act 2. First of all, we've got to remember is where we came to from the end of Act 1. So at the end of Act 1, we have Romeo and Juliet meeting for the first time, and then the final sort of conversation between them is the realisation that they come from different households, and they have that famous line, "My only love sprung from my only hate," and then from Romeo, "My life is in my foe's debt." So we have this realisation that they shouldn't be together, that they have this deep-seated hatred between each other, or there should be that deep-seated hatred between each other. Now, obviously, Act 2 starts with the characters getting back together and how this is going to resolve itself. How can these two characters who are so madly and passionately in love now come to a resolution despite the fact that the deep-seated hatred between their two families? So Act 2 is all about building up that and the relationship between Romeo and Juliet. So we're going to have a look at that in this short video. Okay, so the first thing we have is the prologue for Act 2. Now, with the prologue, we have the warnings about what Romeo and Juliet are about to do, and a reassertion of the dangers of what they're about to do. So the prologue is a really, really useful part of Act 2 because it just reminds the audience that, back from the prologue from the entire play, that these are star-crossed lovers who are doomed to die. And the prologue here reminds the audience that there are risks associated with this relationship, that it's not going to be a simple strategy. It's going to be something that's going to be really complicated, something that's going to be really, really difficult. And the characters are taking risks and going against the advice of their family. The prologue's there just to set the scene for us as an audience, just to give us that brief reminder of this is what's happening, this is where we're at in the play, and now we have a reassertion of the dangers that Romeo and Juliet are placing themselves in. Okay, so the first scene of Act 2, we have Romeo abandoning his friends and trying to break back into the Capulet mansion. Now, this is important for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we've talked about in previous videos how Romeo seems a bit isolated and a bit separate from his friends. Even in like the very first scene in Act 1, Scene 1, we have Benvolio saying that he finds it difficult to reach Romeo and that he'd rather leave him than speak to Romeo about his problems. So at this point, we have Romeo abandoning Mercutio, Benvolio and the other Montagues, and then breaking back into Capulet's orchard. Now, significant for a few different reasons. The fact that he's leaving his friends behind and the fact that he's not discussing what's just happened with his friends tells us that Romeo is someone who is a bit more headstrong. He's very impulsive and he reacts in very spontaneous ways. But also we had the fact that he doesn't trust his friends really to learn, to understand how he's feeling, and actually Mercutio shouts after him, "Madman, lover," because he thinks he's going back in to try and speak to Rosaline. Now, we've had the characters previously speaking to Romeo and trying to downplay the importance and significance of love, and Romeo is now abandoning them to try and meet again his true love, Juliet. So it's quite significant that he's doing that he's choosing to. He could have easily have left with his friends, but he chooses not to. He makes that decision to break back in. And again, we've got this emphasis on risk and how dangerous this would be to break back into the orchard, knowing that the party's over, so he hasn't got that option of the disguise. He is a Montague, and if he's found in the Capulet property, then he would be in some serious, serious trouble. Okay, so the next scene is probably one of the most important ones in the play, and it's so important that it has its own sort of colloquial title, which is the balcony scene. So we have Romeo's broken back into the Capulet orchard, and we have Juliet talking to herself, using a soliloquy where she doesn't think that Romeo is there, and Romeo hears her talking about their relationship. Famous line we have here: "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, so Romeo would were he not Romeo called." We have this idea that Juliet's wanting. She doesn't understand how Romeo can be so loving and so caring, and the only thing she has to hate is his name Montague. She even says, "If thou wilt not do it, then I will no longer be a Capulet." She's willing to renounce her family name to do this. So Romeo uses a lot of descriptive language in here. He describes Juliet as a bright angel, a pair of stars entreat her eyes. There's lots of imagery of light here when he's describing Juliet. And he offers, when he surprises her, and she's very surprised that he is there, she even says that it would be death, considering who thou art. We have Romeo swearing by the moon that he will be loyal to Juliet forever, and Juliet asks him to swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon. So she doesn't want him to make false promises. She doesn't want him to say, "Oh, I'm going to love you forever" on this evening, but then change his mind completely the next day. And she uses that idea of the moon constantly changes, and its cycle goes round and round, and it changes shape and changes size, so your promises really mean nothing. Now, Romeo has actually a much deeper affection for Juliet than what he can express when he says. So what he asks for is the exchange of thy love's faithful vow for mine. He actually proposes marriage, and again, this is a point where we have to suspend our disbelief a little bit about how fast things are moving between them. We've got to imagine these two passionate lovers who are completely obsessed with each other, and now we have the pair of them coming to a realisation that they love each other and they wish to be married. So the end of Act 2, Scene 2 is Romeo leaving, and he uses an interesting metaphor, an interesting simile, in fact, like where he says, love from love goes like schoolboys to their books, but love to love is like schoolboys away from that, as if he's leaving school with a joyful heart by going to love. So this is a really, really interesting scene. It's got a lot in there. That video is really, really quite an important one to get your head around, and there's other activities looking at key quotations from that scene. So we have Romeo leaving, and he heads off to see Friar Lawrence to arrange a marriage as soon as possible. Okay, so the next thing we have is Romeo meeting with Friar Lawrence to arrange a marriage, to arrange a wedding to Juliet. Now, Friar Lawrence is a character who is talking, and he's soliloquising as well at the start of this scene about how things aren't always what they seem. There is often things that are difficult, more tricky. He talks about how in flowers there's quite often poison and delicious things. He talks about how food and poison are very closely linked. Life and death are very closely linked. Light and dark are very closely linked. So he uses a lot of that similar language that Romeo does. Now, when Romeo arrives and starts eulogising about Juliet and talking about how wonderful she is, the friar senses an opportunity, and he sees that this could be a chance to reconcile the two families, to bring them together. So he agrees that a marriage between Romeo and Juliet could be a good thing, and that it would be really, really it would be an opportunity to potentially bring these two families that are warring together. But he asks Romeo to be wise. Sometimes they stumble, those that run too fast. So he cautions Romeo and says, look, we have to be very careful with what we're doing here, because if we do things too fast and too recklessly, then it might cause problems, and we need to be very careful in what we're going to do. But he does agree that he will marry Romeo and Juliet. Okay, the next couple of scenes we didn't actually cover in a video. We didn't go into that much depth. They are really useful to have a read through, and obviously if you're watching a version of the play, you will see these. Essentially, there are two scenes that are to do with preparations for the marriage. We have Romeo and his his friends, where he's using lots of like sort of bawdy sexual language, but then he's interrupted by the nurse who's coming to get his message for Juliet, and he secretly tells the nurse that if Juliet has permission to go to confession, they will go to Friar Lawrence's cell, and there they will be married. Cell meaning like his prayer cell, and there they will be married. So the nurse is thrilled with this, and she sees the trust that Romeo's placed in Juliet. She warns Romeo about how he shouldn't be deceptive with Juliet, and Romeo assures her that his honours his intentions are honourable, and that he truly does love Juliet. So the nurse returns to Juliet, and then the next scene we have the nurse essentially winding Juliet up a little bit when Juliet's desperate for news, and the nurse stalls for as long as she possibly can before allowing Juliet to hear the message that if she's got permission to go to confession, then she can be married to Romeo, and Friar Lawrence is going to do that. Again, we see a really interesting relationship between Juliet and the nurse, a much more maternal relationship where the nurse is the person who's looking after her. The nurse is the person who is more understanding about Juliet's feelings, thoughts and emotions, rather than her mother, who's this sort of cold and more clinical view of life, and obviously is more concerned about getting her married to Paris for the financial benefits that would bring the family. So we have these two scenes to do with the preparation of the marriage, which we didn't go into in a huge amount of detail, but are really useful to have a read through and just have an understanding about the preparations and the building up of the wedding. Okay, then the final scene of Act 2 is the wedding scene between Romeo and Juliet. So there's the Friar Lawrence there, and he cautions the characters and says that honey can be loathsome in its own deliciousness. This sort of thing, like love moderately, love slow, and like extend your love over time. It can be like gunpowder, and it can go like a flash and be over too quickly, or like lightning and disappear. So he warns them about loving moderately and being true to each other and being faithful to each other. So it's a nice thing to wrap things up, and it's significant really that Act 2 ends in this way. So we have the first act all about the build-up between Romeo and Juliet meeting for the first time, then we have Act 2, which is the sort of preparations before their marriage. At this point in the play, everything seems to be going well for these two characters, and I would argue that the very next scene at the start of Act 3 is the one where things start to unravel and start to come apart. So at the end of Act 2 here, we have the wedding wrapping up the end of Act 2, so we have this positive, emotive moment of Romeo and Juliet bringing themselves together in true love. Okay, for you to do for today, what I'd like to do is just to track across the Act 2, looking at the rising and falling action, having a look at what the key events and the key ideas are, and make a timeline of that across the different acts and the different scenes. Obviously, you can go back and watch the different videos. You can use this recap video, or you can use something like SparkNotes and go through and have a look at what happens in each scene. Just a key couple of notes and key ideas to set up your timeline. I would also like you to have a go at a quiz which is going to be put up on Google Classroom in the next couple of days, and it'll just test some of those key ideas about Act 2, and so you understand the key action, the key characters, the key quotations, and work from there. So have a look at the next couple of slides, and then if you stay tuned at the end, we've got today's film recommendation. Okay, so for today's film recommendation, I've gone for an absolute classic, purely because the trailer for the third instalment was released yesterday, and that is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. A fantastic film, really, really funny, some absolutely amazing ideas about time travel and meeting famous characters with 90s surfer vibes. Very, very funny. Definitely worth checking out if you've not seen it before. Until next time, when we'll be looking at Act 3, Scene 1, make sure you take care of yourselves, and I'll see you then.